All right, so another way to solve quadratic equations is through using the quadratic formula. So remember, the quadratic equation is ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0, right? And we can get anything equals 0 by moving everything to one side, right? And why this is so important to know is the letters in front of the variables and then our one constant, right? That is where you're going to kind of pay attention to use the quadratic formula. So this is the equation, the general quadratic equation, and now we're going to have the quadratic formula. And most of you are going to prefer this method of all the methods because it is just putting numbers into a formula. So the quadratic formula is basically, we use the quadratic formula to solve for x like we've been doing. So x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And so there's some things that we can pay attention, right? So I'm only going to talk about for a minute the stuff under the radical sign, right? So there's a couple rules. One, if the b squared minus 4ac is positive and a perfect square, which means you can take the square root of the number, then the roots are real, which means the answer, roots means answer. The roots are real and rational, which means you can put in a fraction form, and unequal, which means you have two answers, right? And the reason you have two answers is because of the plus minus here. So that's just shorthand. It means you have to do the equation twice. You have to do negative b plus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a, and then you have to do the equation again, negative b minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. You must do this equation twice. And that's why you're going to get to two answers. All right. The second rule is if b squared minus 4ac is positive, the roots, it is not a perfect square, which means you cannot take the square root of the number and get a nice rational number. So that means your answer is irrational, which means you're stuck with the radical sign. And again, you'll have two answers. So the answers are unequal. So you'll have two answers. This will practice a little bit number two, because depending on your calculator, things will work out nicely for you or not. Number three, if b squared minus 4a. Question?
Could you go back, because I couldn't see like the bottom part.
So it says if my answer is positive, that means when you do all the arithmetic under the square root, if it is positive and it is not a perfect square, that basically means you are stuck with a square root. So why this is interesting is if you get number one, like if this works, that means this is factorable. This one is not factorable, which means if you have a number two problem or number two scenario, then the only way to solve it is using the quadratic formula or completing the square. The good news is quadratic formula always works. Well, sort of. That's what we're about to talk about here in a minute. if b squared minus 4ac is positive, is equal to 0, right? Which means it is factorable, means the roots are real. It is a rational, and you only have one answer. And the reason for this means this problem was already a perfect square. And remember, we learned a formula for perfect square trinomials, right? Back in chapter 6. And finally, number 4, if b squared minus 4ac is less than 0, which means I got a negative number, we're going to say no solution right now. Because this is dealing with imaginary numbers. So if you ever get a negative under your radical, check your math first and foremost. But secondly, for our course, there'll be no solution because it is imaginary numbers. So these are kind of neat because it lets you kind of know when you're solving how things are going, right? So now let's do an example. Remembering that we need to have our equation written as ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. And if we do that, then I can use the quadratic formula, which is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So let's start with case 1. So if I have x squared plus 2x minus 15 equals 0, in this case, there's nothing here, so I will put a 1 just so we remember. So that is my a, my b is 2, my c is the negative 15, and now we are just putting the numbers into the formula. So I get a negative 2. I'm going to write it out twice so you can kind of see it, because some people get really confused by this plus minus thing. Plus the square root of 2 squared minus the number 4 times my a value, which is 1, and then times my c value, which is a negative 15. And we're going to divide all of that by 2 times 1. Right? So I highly encourage you to find a calculator to do this, to make sure that you can type this into your calculator properly. So how I type this into my calculator, I would either put this in fraction form or put the whole top in parentheses. I got mine in fraction form, so I do negative 2, not subtract 2, must be a negative sign, negative 2 plus the square root, underneath the square root 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times a negative 15, close my parentheses, hit the divide sign, and then divide by 2 times 1. Double check and make sure I put everything in my calculator correctly. And I get the answer 3. Now, I have to do this again. So I will do negative 2 minus the square root 2 squared minus 4 times a times c. Oops, that's a 15. All over 2a, not 2a. 2 times 1, which is just 2, but I'll still put the numbers in there so you can see where they can go. And if I do that out, type it all back in my calculator again, and depending on your calculator, you might be able to just hit the up arrow or the over arrow, and you can just actually change the plus to a minus, which I'm doing on my calculator. And I don't have to type the whole thing in again, and I get negative 5.
Hey, Clay.
Yep.
For the top one, I got 5.483.
You checked. Do you type it all in at once?
Yeah.
Well, what you have to do, because I think you have a Texas, make sure you put all of that in parentheses.
Okay.
And then be careful. You got to make sure this last green parentheses is outside of the square root, because you don't want that square root to, you don't want to be included inside that square root. So depending on your calculators. Personally, if you have a Casio FX300, this lesson is much easier. If you have a Texas, not bad. You just got to be careful how you type it in. Anyone else having issues getting these answers? And you can do it in pieces. That is completely fine if that's what you prefer. But you definitely need to practice. Go ahead, Selena.
Have no idea how to put it in my calculator. I keep getting -8 like every time, even if I put it in separately.
You have a Casio or Texas?
Texas.
Okay. So I lost, someone lost my Texas. I let a student borrow it. So let me see if I can remember how to type it into a Texas. So what you should do, if you have a Texas right now, hit parentheses, -2. Remember, you might make sure you hit the negative sign, not the minus sign. -2 plus, then hit the second key to bring up your square root. Then 2 squared, subtract 4, and then hit the multiplication sign. Of course, you don't have to put a 1 in. So 4 times, then hit the negative sign. So 4 times -15. Push over or close the parentheses if your calculator put parentheses in for your square root. I just used the arrow key on the top right. So that lets my calculator know I'm outside of the square root now. Then close those parentheses. So everything is in the top in parentheses. Then hit divide and put a 2. And hopefully that gave you 3 this time.
It did. Thank you.
Okay. You gotta be careful because I think the Texas adds an extra parentheses. It automatically puts a parentheses in for the square root. So if you go to close it, it thinks you're closing the parentheses on the square root and not the parentheses for the numerator. And the reason you really what's throwing it off in your calculator is this plus sign, right? That is a polynomial on the bottom. So when you don't do it correctly, and where people that were not getting 3, your calculator was only dividing what was in the radical by 2. It wasn't dividing the whole top by 2. You got to make sure you do it. And if you're nervous about putting things in your calculator, then just do the whole top piece first, then hit the divide, because this top piece is a polynomial. So you have to.
I did to work when you want to put that last time.
Good. That's where you have to be careful with this formula. It is a polynomial. You have to keep the addition and the subtraction for the second equation together before you do the division. You have to go outside of the order of operations. That's why so if you have a Texas, you have to put things in parentheses to let your calculator know it has to add and subtract before it divides. If you don't put in the parentheses, your calculator follows order of operations and it does the division first. Then it adds the number on, and that is why you're getting an answer that's off. Any other questions? Because this lesson, this is all it is. Can you take these and put them into your calculator? That's the quadratic formula, right? All right, so the one that's getting 30, you have a Texas, right? Oh, Casio. Oh, even better. You have a Casio. On the left side, hit this button. That will make your calculator go to fraction form. And then all you have to do is type all of this that's in the green parentheses in the top box, and then the 2 in the bottom, and it should work out perfect.
I'm about ready to get me one of the Casio just
I
to
wouldn't,
make my life easier.
but then you have to learn a new calculator. So I always caution people of just jumping to no, yeah. All right, so then you have to do the exact same thing as everyone else. Then put in the green parentheses. So again, hit parentheses, then hit your negative sign and a 2, then a plus key, then your square root key. Then it should bring up a square root. So under the square root, hit 2, and then raise it to the power of 2. You should have a squared key somewhere on your calculator. Then subtract 4 times a negative 15. And when you're looking for the negative sign, typically most calculators have it written like this, in parentheses. That's your negative. The one without the parentheses, that's your subtract. So times a negative 15. And then you got to do just like the Casio people, the Texas people. You have to push over on your arrow to bring your cursor out of the square root, close the parentheses, and then hit divide by 2. Because a lot of times when if you don't push that over key, it's putting in the parentheses underneath the square root. So then when you hit divide by 2, it again thinks the divide by 2 is only on the radical. You got to make sure that the parentheses is outside of the radical for this to work. Did that help you get the right answer? We're going to do another one of these. So this one we just solved. Our answer is x is 3, and our x is negative 5, which means this problem was factorable, so you could have just solved this using the AC method. All right. So that was a case of characteristic 1. Here's our next formula. 3x squared plus x minus 5 equals 0. So remember, this is my A. I have nothing where my B is, so I'm going to put a 1 there. So we can remember there is a B there. There's a 1. It's a B. B. And then we have our C of negative 5. So I go to put this. Okay, I saw your chat. Thank you. I'll put this into my quadratic. X equals negative 1 plus the square root of 1 squared minus 4 times 3 times negative 5. Again, if you're typing all this in, make sure you put these in parentheses. And depending on your calculator, especially if you have an older one, you might not be able to just put parentheses in like here. You might actually have to hit the multiplication key. So some of you that might not work, and if your calculator is old, you might actually have to put a time symbol in there, depending on your calculator. Right? I'm being lazy, I'll write parentheses, but we gotta make sure that's doing it. And then we divide by 2 times a 3. So negative 1 plus the square root of 1 squared minus 4 times 3 times a negative 5, close parentheses, divided by 2 times 3. And I get negative 1 plus the square root of 61 all over 6. Or in decimal form, 1.135. Here is the issue. So this is case 2, because we'll get a different answer here in a minute. Yes, that's what I was just getting to. Thank you, Hannah. Pearson is going to have this. So if your calculator cannot simplify radicals, and you don't know how to simplify radicals, And I think next year, I'm just going to teach this in a different order, because the problem is the way the book's laid out, we don't actually learn how to simplify radicals till after the test. So it is very frustrating if you don't know how to simplify a radical. But the red box is the answer that Pearson wants. But the good news is the test is multiple choice. So you could type that into your calculator with -1 plus the square root of 16 divided by 6. 61 divided by 6 and get 1.135. Yeah, you're going to have to do the extra step if your calculator doesn't simplify radicals. The good news, again, I'm not trying to get anyone to go buy a calculator, but if you have a Casio, my Casio actually gives me, Casios will give you this answer. Texas will not. Texas puts it in decimal form. So on the test, unfortunately, you're going to have to put in the red box into your calculator and figure out which of those radicals give you your decimal. But I can show you how real quick, how to do it so you can, it's not bad to do this. So if we just solve for b, right? So I'm not sorry, solve for b, but if we just solve what's under the square root. So I get what, 1 minus 4 times 3 times a -5. Now I get 61. So there is the square root of 61. So, I don't like yellow. So if you do what's just in the yellow, you get 61. You can't take the square root of 61, so it stays. So then I have a -1 plus the square root of 61, and then 2 times 3 is 6. So that one can't actually be simplified. So it just didn't take the square root of it because it doesn't work. So if you're in Texas, maybe you should just do this in the yellow box in one step to see if it is a perfect square or not. And that way you can kind of see the relationship.
Okay, Chris, for that one, I got 18.74.
All right, so again, make sure you type in this in. So let's walk through it again. So put in a parentheses. I will get back to you on that, Hannah, because mine automatically does it. So I will let you know when I put it into my calculator. So Matt, for you, put in parentheses, -1 plus, hit your square root key, 1 squared minus 4 times 3 times a -5. Hit the over on your arrow so that your parentheses can come outside. Close the parenthesis and divide by. Now, this is probably where you're getting wrong. I have 2 numbers down here, so you also have to put those in parentheses. Divide by 2. So divide parentheses 2 times 3. Or just do it in your head, and 2 times 3 is 6. All right, so let me turn on the light here so we can have a light look at my calculator, what I did here. Because my calculator stays in fraction form. So how did I do that again? So let me see here. All clear. -1, all clear. -1 plus the square root of 61 all over 6. Hannah, on your Casio, you see where the key S and the arrow D? If you hit that, does it automatically put your answer in radical? Okay. Perfect. Oh, no, I got a no. No, it does not. Okay. Okay, yes, you saw it, but no, it doesn't work. So let me see here. Mode. Let me see here. I mean, I'll have to look it up. I got mine set up so my answers are never rounded. I got to remember where that is. I know it's in setup. I just got to remember which one it is. I'll have to look it up again and I'll get back to you on here. Because my calculator doesn't round unless I hit the SD key. So I will look that up. I don't remember exactly where that is. I know it's under setup. I just got to figure out which one it is and I'll email you. All right, so I had a request to also do the negative one, right? So let's clean up this board. Let's erase all of this. So let's see, now x is going to equal -1 minus the square root of 1 squared minus 4 times 3 times -5 all over 2 times 3. So again, you probably have to put parentheses around the whole top and parentheses around the bottom. And again, if you prefer, we can do it in steps, right? So if I do this in steps, this is -1 minus the square root of 1 squared minus 4 times 3 times -5, we already know is 61, right? So you have that. I guess I can clean this up a little bit. And then 2 times 3 is 6. If I do it in pieces, that is the answer. If you type it all in, type it like you're doing the red, and you get a decimal of, let's see here, parentheses, -1 minus, minus the square root of 61 all over 6. Which gives me a -1.47. I'll try to go into a test to see if there's a way I can overwrite it so it doesn't have to be in radical form, but I don't think there is.
How do you figure it out in radical form?
How did I get this in the red box?
Yeah.
Do it in pieces. So basically I solved.
Oh, so what's in the radical is 61.
Yep, because 1 squared minus, let's say, so -4 times a -5 gives me a +20. 20 times 3 gives me 60, and then 60 plus 1 gives me 61. So that's, yeah, what's inside, so b squared minus 4ac is 61. So, and I can't take the radical of 61. All right, let's do another. Let's see, what if I have, there we go. x squared minus 14x plus 49 equals 0. Give everybody a sec to try to solve that one. And then I will come in and look at that. I'm gonna check my chats real quick. How I don't, okay. While you do that, I'm gonna see if I can find out how to fix this Casio calculator real quick. All right, everything's saying nasty key, so I'll have to keep looking it up, but I'm going to solve this problem now. So if I do the quadratic formula, I get negative 14 plus the square root of negative 14 squared. You have to make sure you put that in parentheses or your calculator is not going to make it a positive. Minus 4 times 1 times 49 all over 2 times 1. So this one I'm going to do in steps because I want you to see something. So negative 14 squared minus 4 times 49. All right, something's wrong here. What did I type in my calculator wrong? Negative 14 squared. There we go. All right, right. So if I do this in pieces, I get 14 plus the square root And if you do this correctly, you end up getting a 0 in there. So because negative 14 squared minus 4 times 49 equals 0. Well, the square root of 0 is 0, so that just goes away. So all I'm left is 14 over 2, which is 7. Well, when I go to do this with a subtraction sign, I'm still subtracting nothing. So in this case, I only get one answer. I only get 7, which means this problem is a perfect square.
I keep getting a domain error every time I put it in.
So let's see. If I type this in, you trying to type it in all at once? Or did
No,
you type
I broke it down too.
So you broke it down. So did you get 0 for
No.
everything inside?
I
here?
still got domain error.
So you did it all under the square root at once, I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yes. Try, I think what you probably did is, so try this. Put in parentheses, negative 14, close parentheses, then squared, minus 4 times 49. Because if you don't put the parentheses around the square is only going to go on the 14 and it's not going to change it to a positive.
Yeah, I'm still getting domain error.
What do you have, a Texas?
Yeah.
Let me check. I don't have the TI-30X. I have the TI-84. Let's see what it does on a TI-84. Anyone else getting domain error on TI-30X?
I did.
Okay, so let's see here. All right, so
I'm not getting an error, but I got -7 as the answer using the AC method.
It should be a positive 7.
Okay. I probably missed a sign.
Well, no, no, because you'll get x minus 7, and then when you go to solve for x, you have to add 7 to the other side, which what makes it positive. It has to be when you go to do AC method because of this guy. I need 2 negatives to make a positive, but I need them to be negative, so I get a negative 14.
Gotcha, yeah. I forgot to set it to 0. Too early.
Okay. So negative 14 squared, plus, dang it, delete. Minus 4 times 49. All right, so my TI-84 worked. All right, so here's if your Texas are being annoying. So Tim says he goes to TI-30. So and got it by what you put in. Leave out any parentheses and it messes up. Yeah, the Texas is very finicky with the parentheses. You gotta be real careful. So what I recommend that you remind yourself to do, make a note. You know this negative 14 squared here is going to become positive because it's supposed to. So instead of putting a negative 14 in your calculator, just put in a positive 14. Because you know 2 negatives become a positive. So for some reason, your calculator, Tim said he got to work, but you got to be really careful when you put the parentheses on the TI-30X. That is going to become a positive because of the squared. So on your calculators, instead of doing, even though it should work, but it's hard to say. I'm not in a classroom, so I can't see exactly what you're typing. Instead of putting a negative, because you know mathematically it's going to become positive when you square it, just put in a positive 14 and see if that works. That's why I'm going. Okay, that's why I'm going slow through this day, because there's not a lot to this lesson. It really comes down into the different types of calculators and what they're doing.
Chris, I
Yep.
had enough of this calculator. I forgot the 2 times 1, but I still got a domain error. This thing
You're
is
getting a domain error,
driving
not
me up the wall.
you're getting a domain error because of this guy. So instead of trying to type it all in at once under the square root, just do negative 14 parentheses squared minus 4 times a 49. No square root. Just type that just in your calculator. And if your calculator should do that, and you'll get an answer of 0.
Okay, that worked.
Yeah, so this is why I want people to practice, because you got to be comfortable with your calculator, because you're already going to be stressed on because it's a test, right? So I don't want people stressing on the test and then the calculators are failing on them. So make sure that you do a couple of these. I highly encourage you to go to the class problems and practice a couple. I wrote out how I did everything on them, so you can kind of see. And it can get a little, it gets finicky. So you definitely got to practice. And again, if it's typing it all at once keeps messing up your calculator, then just, on your calculator, the safest thing for you to do is to do it in steps, right? Okay. Any other questions before we go on to 7.4? And the good news is all 7.4 is graphing these, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about graphing today, and then we'll get into how to actually graph these things and everything on Monday, because that'll give us a good review for solving some of these problems, because you have to do all these steps. So to graph this thing, so 7.4 is graphing, right? So a quadratic, which is what we're drawing here. Oops, my eraser clicked on. A quadratic is, all a quadratic is a parabola. It looks like this, or like these, right? It is a parabola. So when I graph my parabola, and I graph it on a XY plane, right? What you're actually finding, no, I don't want that one, sorry. There we go. When you solve for X, so which is what we've done so far, so 7.1, 7.2, 7.3, all we did was solve for X, right? 7.1, solve by factoring. 7.2, solve by using completing the square. 7.3, solve by using the quadratic formula. We solved for X. And what that tells us where your parabola crosses the x-axis. So on the first problem we did today, I forgot what the answer was now. -5 and 3, right? When we solved that first one, we got x is -5 and x is 3, right? Mine's obviously not drawn properly, but the point then is -5, 0 and 3, 0, because it is where these are my x-intercepts. So you've already found 2 of the points for graphing a parabola by what we've been doing. So the only other 2 points we're going to learn how to graph is this guy. Well, we already know what that one's called, right? That is our y-intercept. And remember, back in lines, the y-intercept is where x is equal to 0. So all you actually do is put 0 in for x and solve for y, and you have your answer. The harder one to find is what we call the vertex. And that is the turning point, right? And it's either the minimum over here, where I'm putting my big green dot, if your parabola goes up, or it is the maximum if your parabola goes down. But the easiest thing to remember what a vertex is, just think of it, it's the turning point. It is where the parabola finally changes directions, right? So if I'm coming down my graph, I'm going down, 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 I hit my vertex, and then all of a sudden I'm going back up. So it is the turning point. So to graph a parabola, we're going to graph 4 points. So to graph a parabola, well, we'll call it a quadratic, same thing. To graph a quadratic, we need our x-intercepts, we need our y-intercept, and we need our vertex. And like I said, to find your x-intercepts, all you do is solve for x. To find your y-intercept, x is equal to 0. Solve for y. To find the vertex, it has a formula. For the what we call our x coordinate, right? So be careful, this is not x, but this is the x coordinate when we draw a graph on an xy plane. So to find the first number in a point, it is the formula negative b all over 2a. Well, that should look familiar. That is the first part of the quadratic formula. So you find that value by using a formula. Then to find the y point, right, or the second point of your system, you take the answer from x, so take the answer from the formula and put it into the equation. And when you solve, that gives you the y value. All right, so there's the 4 steps. Now, to put this all together, again, how you solve for x, that's either 7.1, 7.2, or 7.3. To find the y-intercept, put in x equals 0. To find the vertex, you use this formula. So we'll do one today, and then we'll do another one of these on Monday, as well as a word problem. And then I'll answer any questions we have on Monday. So let's go through one of these through the whole process so you can see it, and we'll do it again on Monday. So if I have y equals 3x squared plus 12x minus 4, right? So there is my equation. To remember, to solve for x, this has to equal, right, 0. So to solve for x, it has to equal 0, right? The equation. The equation must equal 0, which means all I say is y equals 0. So my quadratic equation then becomes 0 equals 3x squared plus 12x minus 4. If I do the quadratic formula, I get negative 12 plus the square root 12 squared minus 4 times 3 times a negative 4 all over 2 times 3. If I do that, let's see, negative 12 plus square root 12 squared minus 4 times 3 times a negative 4 all over 2 times 3, which is just 6. Ow. What did I do here? Well, this is supposed to work out nicely. Oh, no, it doesn't. I'm right. Yeah, I didn't pick a nice problem. Why did I do that to myself? That's all right. 4 radical 3 all over 3, which just is 0.0309. All right, let's saw a question on chat. You have to do the add and subtract twice. You have to do it twice. So I do it once with an add, and then I have to do it again. You don't get a choice. You have to do it twice. 12 squared minus 4 times 3 times a negative 4 all over 2 times 3. So if I change this to a subtract now, I get a equals negative 6 plus radical. How did I get the same answer? I should know I got the same answer. 4 radical 3 all over 3. No, I didn't get the same answer. That must have been a positive in the last one because I got a positive answer. There we go. Equals a negative 4.309. So let me go back and make sure I didn't screw my plus answer here. Oh, that is my plus answer. What did I do wrong? So that is my minus answer. That is my plus. Complete plus.
I think it's your first answer that's wrong. I think it should be negative.
Yeah. So what did that do? Why it looks? I get different numbers when I put in decimal form, but my two answers are exactly the same. I'm trying to see what's different. Oh, nah, my calculator, what it's doing. My calculator is where it lies. This is the minus is here, and the other one, the minus is on the -6. So this one's up here, and this one, it moved it delete down in here. So I don't know why that makes a difference. I know my decimals are right. I don't know why calculator is doing that. My calculator is doing something strange. But those are the right decimals. So you should, one answer will be positive, which I'll have to play on my calculator to figure out why it's doing what it's doing. So one is 0.309 and one is a negative 0.4309. I don't know why my calculator is just moving the subtraction around and getting a different answer, but those are the right answers in decimal form.
On the top one, is that a 4 before the square root of 3?
Yes.
Okay, just checking.
Yeah, my calculator is kind of showing the same thing, it's just moving the negative sign around. I gotta play with it, figure out why it's doing that. But when I go to decimal form, I get those two answers, which are the right answers. So this tells me X, Y. So let me go back here. I got a 0.309 and a negative 4 point. So basically 0.3 and a negative 4.3. So I got a 0.3, so we'll call that right there. I'll put the number right below so we can see it. And then I have 1, 2, 3, 4. And then a little bit past the 4, I have a negative 4 point. What was it again? 3? Yes. 4.3. So I know, and there's my 1 there. So I know there's where this parabola is going to cross the x-axis. So now I go back. 3x squared plus 12x minus 4. 3x squared plus 12x minus 4. Y equals. And so what I'm going to do to find where it crosses the y-intercept, so to find my y-intercept, I am going to let x equals 0. So then y equals 3 times 0 squared, oops, got my x, plus 12 times 0 minus 4. Well, that becomes a 0. That becomes a 0. So therefore, my y just equals negative 4. So that means it crosses 1, 2, 3, 4. So it crosses the y-axis right there. Now I got to find my vertex. Yeah, work with me. Vertex. So first I have to solve negative b over 2a, which equals a negative 12 over 2 times 3, which equals negative 12 over 6, which equals negative 2. So my vertex, I'll write it up here so I have some room. I know the first point is negative 2. Now I got to find the next point. So to find the next point, I do the same thing as I did before, but instead of letting x be 0, I'm going to let x be negative 2. So I do 3 parentheses negative 2 squared plus 12 times negative 2 minus 4. And if I do that math out, I should get a negative 16. So negative 16 goes there. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Way down here. Right? And it's a -2 down 16. So my point is way down here is my vertex. And then I connect my points, which I draw even worse on an iPad than I do in the classroom. And there is my horribly drawn parabola. Now, a neat little trick I like to here, A. My A is a +3. If A is positive, your parabola always turns up. If A is negative, then your parabola goes down. So that's a good way to kind of check to make sure everything's in place. Well, everything looks to be in place, so I am good. And there are my 4 points. My 2 black points are my x-intercepts. This one is my y-intercept, and this bottom one is my vertex. So we'll start next class off with another one of these. And then we'll do a word problem of one of these. And then we'll use the remainder of the class to answer any questions that you may have before I post the test. Any questions on what we covered today?